Revolting Tuli here, and
Wake up, it's only 2:30.
Today we're going to continue our long march through Howard Zinn's great book, Declarations of Independence, or is it Interdependence?
At better libraries everywhere.
And yeah, it's Hopper. It's actually Murdoch's crowd now. He owns Howard.
Hopper Collins, doesn't he?
Yeah, Hopper Perennial. And 1990, and we're on the chapter called Free Speech. And Lannes Kenfield's going to continue this. And here's Lannes.
Okay, today, boys and girls, we'll be talking about Secret Police in a Democracy by Howard Zinn. In our country, so proud of its democratic institutions, a national secret police has operated for a long time in a clandestine world where the Constitution can be ignored. I'm referring to the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Central Intelligence Agency. There was a CIA official, Ray Klein, who, when there was talk of the CIA's activity violating the First Amendment, told Congress, "It's only an amendment." We might comfort ourselves with the thought that the FBI and the CIA are not as fearsome as the KGB of the Soviet Union, or the death squads that have operated in right-wing dictatorships supported by the United States, El Salvador, for instance. The scale of terror is not comparable. A radical critic of American foreign policy is not likely to be picked up in the middle of the night, immediately imprisoned, or taken out and shot. Hooray! Although, it is sobering to recall that the FBI conspired with Chicago police in 1969 to murder the black leader, Fred Hampton, in his bed.
Well, they were just blacks.
Yeah, sure. And they were just citizens.
Well, blacks
in a democracy. Now, yeah, sure, now you say. But should citizens who cherish democracy use the standards of totalitarian states to measure their freedom? We want something better than to say, we're not as bad as those countries. The actual apprehension of dissidents is on a much smaller scale in our country compared to theirs. But the mere existence of organizations secretly collecting information on citizens must have a chilling effect on free speech everywhere. Wasn't it Lenny Bruce who said, sure, there's freedom of speech, but no one ever said freedom of hearing?
Paul Goodman said you can say anything you want in this country.
As long as nobody listens.
As long as it doesn't have any effect.
And as long as it doesn't have any effect. But as soon as people start listening to you, watch out. The FBI, according to a Senate report in 1976, has files on 500,000 Americans.
Is that like, that's more than McDonald's? Is that less than McDonald's hamburgers?
Yeah, billions and billions.
Oh, well.
Well, then. So, well, and that was 1976, so it's probably double that number now.
Well, you know, they destroy those files, didn't they?
Right, sure. No, they probably just microfilm them.
I think they're on some computers, probably, with the RCMP.
Well, as they say, with computers, you can never get rid of anything once it's inputted. Should citizens who cherish democracy... Oh, I already said that. However, the FBI goes far beyond a collection of information. We learned this from a mysterious raid in 1971 on FBI offices in the town of Media, Pennsylvania. Its perpetrators have not been found. The FBI files were ransacked and then leaked to a small radical magazine to publish them. Many of the documents were headed with the word Cointelrpro.
Cointelrpro.
Cointelrpro. And only later was it discovered what stood for Counterintelligence Program.
And you know, everyone is familiar with the person who headed that program.
Who might that be?
He was an assistant district attorney, federal
district
attorney No, that's not
federal prosecutor.
Yeah, he was the second in command of the Attorney General.
Assistant Attorney General.
Yes.
Back in those days.
Yeah.
But now he's got a much higher office.
Yes. And it's none other than
Our Secretary of State.
Warren Christopher, the coat man, black coat man. I can't remember one single thing he's ever said, but of course if you're in Cointelrpro...
He squints very well, though.
You don't... He what?
He squints well.
Yeah, you don't want people to be quoting you all the time.
Not if you're Cointelrpro.
So let's see, is that a demotion? I think probably.
I think he's been demoted to the overt side from covert.
To becoming, yeah.
He's been outed. The Senate committee investigating the FBI in the mid-'70s wrote in its report, Cointelrpro is the FBI acronym for, I'll get my mouth working in a little while, for a series of covert action programs directed against domestic groups. In these programs, the Bureau went beyond the collection of intelligence to secret action designed to disrupt and neutralize, the FBI's word, target groups and individuals. The techniques ranging from the trivial, like mailing reprints of Reader's Digest articles to college administrators, to the degrading, sending anonymous poison pen letters intending to break up marriages, and the dangerous.
If the marriages couldn't break themselves.
Yeah. And the dangerous, encouraging gang warfare, falsely labeling members of a violent group as police informers. The program began in 1956, according to the Senate committee, ending in '71 because of the threat of public exposure. Like we believe that, right? The raid on media office took place in March 8, 1971. The FBI decided to terminate Cointelrpro on April 27, 1971. Only a month later, by coincidence, I suppose. The Senate report said, in the intervening 15 years, the Bureau conducted a sophisticated vigilante operation aimed squarely at preventing the exercise of First Amendment rights of speech and association, on the theory that preventing the growth of dangerous groups and the propagation of dangerous ideas would protect the national security and deter violence. That's right. They don't want you to be violent. They want all the violence for themselves.
The government has a monopoly of force. A legal monopoly. That's what makes it a government.
And don't forget, according to them, ideas are dangerous.
And we're not for force because we're pacifists here. But what right do people who have more guns than anyone else tell other people not to have guns?
Not to have guns. Yeah, well, the Michael Moore's latest book, Downsize This, right? Which I'm just finishing, is a great book, by the way. I can recommend it. Its subtitle is Rantings of an Unarmed American.
What's the matter with him?
Hey.
Freak.
It's un-American. Again, the excuse of, well, now, of course, that there's a lot of disgruntled Americans out there due to, like, for instance, 1 million people in Michigan being unemployed, kicked out of the auto industry in the last 15 years. And a lot of those that are still employed are shunted off into subcontracting minimum wage jobs that used to be union jobs. And there's a little wonder that there's the largest number of militias in any state. At last count there were 15. And now that this whole thing about getting rid of guns and all that stuff has gained more and more popularity with police and the ATF. Used to be that we would say, well, we're a free country and everyone can have guns, but now that maybe they're a little worried that people are disgruntled out there, that it won't be just deer they're shooting down.
Yeah, well, you're always talking about the disgruntled people. What about the gruntled?
What about the gruntled people? Yeah.
Yeah, you never talk about them. You might. Are you an American?
Yes, through and I'm a human.
Uh-oh.
And don't forget, a primate to you, buddy.
Can you still be a human and be American?
A well-fed one at that. Again, the excuse of national security, James Madison, back in 1798, had warned about this in a letter to Thomas Jefferson. Perhaps it is a universal truth that the loss of liberty at home is to be charged to provisions against danger real or pretended from abroad.
Read that three times again, louder.
Perhaps it is a universal truth that the loss of liberty at home is to be charged to provisions against danger real or pretended from abroad.
And not the Americans aren't the only ones to do that. The American government. It's always them, you know, the other side. We have to shoot you because if not, the Germans might shoot you.
Right. Or it was the Cold War. Now we're having to fish around for other enemies now that the Russians are no longer are the evil empire. Of course, in Muslim countries, of course, their enemies are always devils, right?
Oh yeah.
We used to be able to get away with that, when religion was like a lot more important in our country.
Well, there were a lot of devils.
Because God would always be on our side,
There's only one God, but there's a lot of devils.
But now they're just the evil empire. We're reduced to using movie terminology, right? But it's just as effective. So perhaps it is a universal truth, for the third and last time, by the way, that the loss of liberty at home is to be charged to provisions against danger, real or pretended, from abroad. In a totalitarian state, we assume that the head of state is aware of operations of his secret police. In a country like the United States, however, the higher officials claim that they don't know what is going on. Like former Attorney General Katzenbach said, he didn't know but couldn't have stopped it anyway. Officially, the Attorney General is higher in rank than the director of the FBI, but the FBI has a power that attorneys general and even presidents are afraid to touch. And we'll be back instantly.
You could have continued. I got a cramp.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll just go ahead then.
Yeah.
All right.
All right?
Okay.
Should I start again?
No, we're still going. We're rolling.
Oh, we are rolling?
Yeah, we're still rolling. Don't worry about it.
All right, folks, I'm just going to the bathroom.
The camera person who you'll hardly know.
I'll be back.
We'll be back.
It's refreshed in a little while.
It's 3 in the morning. It's at
call of nature.
middle of the night call of
You
nature.
want to go too? Just
Hey,
call.
wait a minute. I'm still on.
Yeah, no, but no, not you. I mean the listener, the viewer. If they want to go,
Wait till the end of the show.
call, and then we'll just take a bottle.
All right, let's get back to the serious stuff here. Anyway, it should not be thought that the President or the Attorney General strongly disapproved of these activities, illegal as many of them were. J. Edgar Hoover's successor director, Clarence Kelly, told the Senate committee, quote, "The FBI employees did what they felt was expected of them by the President, the Attorney General, the Congress, and the people of the United States." How the FBI knew what the people wanted is not clear. But the Bureau did have a fairly good idea what the President wanted and what would get the support of Congress. This is a long record, at least from 53 to 73, of illegal opening of citizens' mail by the FBI. There's also a long record of illegal break-ins, black bag jobs, sometimes called surreptitious entry. The report of the Senate committee concluded, "We cannot discuss what we have found as isolated acts, which were limited in time and confined to a few willful men. The failures to obey the law and, in the words of the oath of office of the President, to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution have occurred repeatedly throughout administrations of both political parties going back 4 decades." Well, that tells you more about both political parties than it does about so-called democracy and the Constitution. And you may think that it's other people's mail that's being broken into, but until it's yours, you may want to think twice. The 1973 staff assistant in the White House, Tom Houston, drew up a plan approved by Nixon that included wiretapping, mail coverage, surreptitious entry, sometimes known as black bag jobs, or just plain stealing and burglary. He said, use of this technique is clearly illegal and amounts to burglary. It is also highly risky and could result in great embarrassment if exposed. However, it is also the most fruitful tool and can produce a kind of intelligence which cannot be obtained in any other fashion. Fashion. One wonders about the files of these 500,000 people, or is it 1 million or 2 million? How can we tell? Because the FBI operates in secret. We know from the records of the loyalty investigations of the 50s that the FBI filed reports on government employees who had been seen entertaining black people, or who had been seen at a concert where Paul Robeson sang, and so on. One employee was told, we have a confidential informant who says he visited your house and listened in your apartment to a recorded opera entitled The Cradle Will Rock. And that opera followed along the lines of a downtrodden laboring man and the evils of the capitalist system. So next time you're listening or watching television, someone else may be listening also. The FBI also maintained files on a number of famous American writers. There's a whole book by Herbert Mitgang, by the way, that chronicles all of these files, tens and then hundreds of thousands of files on famous Americans, including Ernest Hemingway, as it says here. There was a file on Ernest Hemingway, who the FBI labeled a drunk and a communist. The novelist John Steinbeck, Grapes of Wrath, Pearl Buck, The Good Earth, were in the FBI files as people who promoted civil rights of blacks. Now you know just how dangerous they are. John Dos Passos, USA, and William Faulkner, The Sound and the Fury, Tennessee Williams, The Streetcar Named Desire, were all on the list. Of course, about Sinclair Lewis, on whom there was a dossier of 150 pages, the FBI said his novel, King's Blood Royal, was propaganda for the white man's acceptance of the Negro as a social equal. I rest my case. This is the FBI. There were more serious FBI files than these. The ones kept on members of radical groups whose names were put on a security index, which at one time listed 15,000. The people on this list were to be picked up and detained without trial in case of a national emergency. Doesn't sound like democracy to me. In 1950, Congress passed an Emergency Detention Act, which provided for a set of detention centers, perhaps more accurately, concentration camps, for those people on the security index. And although the act was repealed in 1971, the FBI continued its index. When the former head of the FBI's Racial Intelligence Section was asked if during 15 years of Cointelrpro, I wonder what it's called now, since how Cointelrpro was stopped.
You mean the nigger squad?
I guess that's what they call it. Anyone in the FBI questioning the legality of what was being done, he replied, no, we never gave it a thought.
What about the kite squad?
Exactly. As part of Cointelrpro, the FBI in 1970 tried to discredit Jean Seberg, an actress famous for her part in the French film Breathless, was a sympathizer...
Well, that would be the cunt squad, wouldn't it?
Of the Black Panther Party. The FBI suggested that she be neutralized. Seberg was in the 7th month of pregnancy when she read in a newspaper that she had become pregnant by a member of the Black Panther Party. It was a false story planted by the FBI. The shock of the story led to premature labor. The child was born dead. She tried to commit suicide, according to her husband, every year on the anniversary of the baby's death. And in 1979, she did kill herself. It's hard to tell how many people lost their lives as a result of Cointelrpro, but documents from FBI files obtained under the Freedom of Information Act, how did that squeak through, indicated that in the late 1960s and early 19...
you there so we get more light on you. Sit in front of the lights. We want to see some of the lights.
You want more...
Yeah, those lights are nice.
Now it's good.
Sit in front of sit between the two lamps.
Here. The scene.
We have to have some direction here, you know. Turn the lights on, if you don't mind.
No, you won't be able to see a thing.
Oh, all right. But don't look at the lights. Look at Lanny after a while. We have to give instructions to the audience.
I'll tell you. Late
Now,
night,
take out the garbage now. Look.
It's hard to...
Listen, you know, while you're listening to Lanny, you can go around and do your...
If you have a small apartment.
Yeah.
What are you telling them what to do? What are you, a communist?
No, I'm a fascist.
Oh, that's better. All right.
You know, I'm going to control the rest of our audience for the rest of their lives.
Okay, go ahead.
From now, all of you, I command you to do, for the rest of your lives, whatever you want.
Oh, no, not that. Indicated that in the late 60s and early 70s, when the FBI was trying to break up the Black Panther organization, 19 Black Panthers across the nation were killed by law enforcement officials or by one another in internal feuds, which was provoked by the FBI. One of these deaths was Fred Hampton, the Chicago Black Panther leader. It turned out that his personal bodyguard, William O'Neill, was an FBI infiltrator who gave his FBI contact, Roy Mitchell, a detailed floor plan of the apartment.
Oh, the FBI wouldn't do something
occupied by Fred Hampton and others. And in a pre-dawn raid, Chicago police fired hundreds of bullets into the apartment.
How many bullets?
Hampton, asleep in his bed, was killed. Hundreds. There was an FBI memorandum from the Chicago office, December 8, 1969, a few days after the raid, which said, prior to the raid, a detailed inventory of weapons and also a detailed floor plan of the apartment were furnished to local authorities. The raid was based on information furnished by an informant. Although the Cointelrpro was declared suspended in '71, the FBI continued to keep tabs on organizations. Let's see, what do we got? 6 minutes to go. Just checking the time. Continue to keep tabs on organizations that were carrying on non-violent political activities, but in opposition to official government policy. In 1988, it was revealed in documents given to the Center for Constitutional Rights under the Freedom of Information Act that the FBI had infiltrated and kept records on hundreds of organizations in the United States that were opposed to President Reagan's policy in Central America. There were 3,500 pages of files. Those are just the ones that were released.
By the way, you have to pay for those. And I think, for instance, I don't know, like $1 a page sounds reasonable. So for that, you'd have to pay $3,500. But I know someone who had 50,000 pages. How the hell were they going to get that?
And those are just the ones that they give you. Like,
yeah, and they're all blacked out, too. Yeah. And how can you trust them? They black out the informant's name. You know, your cousin. Or your...
The excuse was that the FBI was concerned about terrorism. But the record showed a concern for which of these organizations were saying in speech and in writing. A dispatch from the FBI field office in New Orleans...
Wait, could I ask you something? If there's a
1983
group
said...
that kills tens of thousands, maybe 50,000 people in a foreign country, are they terrorists?
Well, it depends on whose victim is being gored.
Well, that's what happened in Iraq.
They could be freedom fighters, they could be terrorists.
In Iraq,
they could be gangsters, they could be banditos.
Or heroes. Well, the terrorists that killed 50,000 Iraqis, or unknown numbers, and who caused the death by starvation of thousands and lack of medication by thousands of Not, you know, not ordinary starvation, but deprivation of essential elements.
And that
Thousands
person's name would be
Iraqi children. Yeah, that sounds like a kind of terrorism to me. But
and that person's name would be.
Who am I? No.
You're not that guy.
No questions.
Come on, you know who it is. Man or woman? Animal, vegetable, or mineral?
Bigger than a.
Bigger than bigger than an ammunition box.
Bigger than a can of Cyclone
gas. And it is imperative, according to the FBI Field Office Dispatch, at this time, to formulate some plan against CISPAS, Committee in Support of the People of El Salvador, and specifically against individuals who defiantly display...
And we're not defending Saddam Hussein, but one evil turn doesn't deserve another, does it? All right. We think about that at home. Lanny's thought about it already.
Stop interrupting my interruptions, please.
Okay. Please don't talk while I'm interrupting.
This is an official FBI document I was quoting.
All right. Go ahead.
It is imperative at this time to formulate some plan of actions against CISPAS, Committee in Support of the People of El Salvador, and specifically against individuals who defiantly display their contempt for the U.S. government by, now this is really dangerous, making speeches and propagandizing their cause.
Are you trying to show contempt of court? No, Your Honor, I'm trying to hide it.
What happens to members of the secret police who engage in illegal acts? Well, hardly anything. If there is a particularly flagrant set of actions that are exposed to the public, they may be a token prosecution of one or two minor figures, but they certainly will not be sent to prison, as would ordinary people who intercepted mail or broke into people's homes or shot down people, like that FBI guy, right, that was shooting that fruitcake or a guy up in
that was
Northwest.
A mistake.
Yeah, and he really got punished. He wasn't promoted after that.
Oh.
They tried to promote him, but they couldn't because there was too much press. We have as evidence of Mark Felt and Edward Miller, two FBI agents, who were the only FBI men prosecuted despite the evidence of thousands of illegal acts brought out by the Senate committee investigating the FBI. Felt and Miller were convicted of authorizing 9 illegal break-ins at homes of friends and relatives of members of the members of the Weather Underground, a radical offshoot of the 60s student movement. There was an